Mr. Purdon and Mr. Gurr, are we ready to begin the meeting?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. I will now call the regular meeting of the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board to order. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we are conducting the monthly board meeting today via video teleconference. First thing we have on the agenda this morning, we call to order the recognition of a quorum. I will conduct a roll call of board members that are present on this teleconference. When I call your name, please say yes. Steve Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Colbert. Okay. Dr. May. Candace White.
Yes.
Thank you. Marissa O'Neill. Dr. Daniel Gerst.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Hampton, do we have any introductions this morning?
Not today, Chairman Hilton.
Thank you. Do we have any public recognitions this morning?
No, sir.
Thank you. The minutes of the regular meeting held on July the 20th were submitted electronically for your review. Are there any changes or upgrades to minutes by board members?
No.
Hearing none, the minutes are adopted. Thank you. Mr. Gary, has anyone registered to make a comment this morning?
Yes, we have several registered speakers this morning. Chairman Hilton, the first is Ms. Morgan Keith. Andy, it looks like Ms. Keith is with us via WebEx. If you could unmute her and allow her to make her comment, please.
Right, I just changed her audio selection, and she should be available now. Let me.
If you're able to promote her so she can be seen if she wishes to as well, that would be great.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Awesome, thank you. I think I can start my video. Maybe. There we go. Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning. My name is Morgan Keith, and my husband and I have been residents of Lake Forest for the past 14 years. Less than a year ago, I became a board member because I wanted to be an advocate for the neighborhood that my family and I love so much, and one of the big reasons why I stayed in Louisville, given the opportunity to move and made this our forever home. So that's why I'm here today, to be a voice for the residents of the community and make known the opposition to the concrete plant for 13905 Aiken Road. I do not think it's any secret at this point to this board that there is strong and widespread opposition. And the reason being is there are actually multiple homes that are within 500 to 600 feet of this proposed plant. And it's also within close proximity to a school, Stouffer Elementary, senior living facilities, an adult disability center, and other sensitive areas. This area was zoned M3 in 1982, long before this area expanded to be primarily residential. A concrete plant is incompatible with existing uses in this immediate area, not to mention pollution and silica dust from these types of plants is harmful to human health. The NIH, the American Cancer Society, CDC, EPA, OSHA, the American Lung Association all recognize the respiratory effects of even low-level exposure of concrete dust on a person's health. I have this a very personal connection to this because I'm just a few streets over from where the concrete plant is going, and I have 2 children that are 6 and 3. And we spend a substantial amount of time outside. So of course you can understand my concern of the air they breathe, considering our close proximity. And of course the lungs of children are growing, and there have been numerous studies that show that exposure to air pollution when someone is young can cause their lungs to not fully develop. And so what we're talking about here is more than 30 years of exposure, considering the plant's 30-year lease. So therefore that's 30 years of exposure for nearby children and residents. And I'm not the only resident within close proximity with health concerns. Within just 500 to 600 feet of this plant is a family with a special needs child, a baby who was born prematurely with underdeveloped lungs, a woman with asthma, and a woman under cancer treatment. And I think another concern outside the pollution is that this concrete plant, according to his own application, has never operated a concrete plant in its history. And given the Butchertown neighborhood example, whose developer has experience, but still has at least 20 air quality violations for failure to follow a dust plan and multiple complaints of dust, mud, and rock, it does not solicit confidence in the inexperienced. In my opinion, these consistent violations are blatant disregard for the health and safety of the Butchertown neighborhoods. Given that experienced plant cannot get it right, I think the concern of our neighborhood regarding an inexperienced plant is very valid and very real. So today I wanted to...
This is Chairman Hilton. We try to limit the comments to 3 minutes or less.
Yep, and I'm just narrowing down. My last request was I wanted to formally request a public hearing so that the residents of this community have due process and can voice their concerns to this board, not just via me, but via themselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Andy, the next speaker is also with us via WebEx, Brian Hara. If you could unmute and promote Mr. Hara as well, please. Oh. I do not see Mr. Hara now. He was with us a moment ago. Oh, he is promoted. All right. I'm sorry. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
This is Chairman Hilton. Please limit your comments to at least 3 minutes or less. Thank you.
Mr. Hara, we cannot hear you. I'm not sure if it's on our end or yours. Sorry.
Okay. It looks like his
Can you hear me now?
Audio just became active.
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm usually one for operator error, so I apologize. But thank you for the opportunity to make a brief comment. I'm also a resident of Lake Forest, longtime resident, and unfortunately I have personal experience with the complications and cancer that can be caused by particulates in the air. And here we're dealing with silica, of course, and concrete dust that can travel a half mile or more, and of course contains silica, which is a known carcinogen with irreversible health effects, particularly in children. And as Ms. Keith mentioned, we've got a Center for Adults with Disabilities right next door to it. We've got Stouffer Elementary on the St. Mary's property, which is the Adult with Disabilities Center. There's a football practice field for another local grade school. There's a church across the street, and of course the Lake Forest Homes right across the street. Notice, so far as we can tell, wasn't provided to any of those Lake Forest residents as far as the zoning process goes. So I too had submitted an email 10 days or so ago requesting a hearing for this concrete batch plan at 13905 Aiken Road, and wanted to have the opportunity again here to formally request a public hearing on that, because no one was able to be heard before the Zoning Commission, and we hope this process will be different. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andy, the last speaker is Joseph Nance.
I have promoted him to panelist. It does take a second for audio and video to catch up.
Okay. Go ahead and try it out, Mr. Nance.
Is everyone able to hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Hara and Mrs. Keith for presenting as well. I stand with them as well in regards to the health and safety concerns that I have for the residents, along with the community surrounding these plans for the concrete plant. I won't take too much more of your time. I'm also strongly asking for a hearing to be done as well, so the public can voice their opinions.
Is that it, Mr. Gary?
That is all of the registered speakers. We have a written comment submitted as well from Ross Cousin, who was not able to attend, but wrote, "This comment is concerning the concrete batch plant off Aiken Road, asking for a permit from the APCD. When voting yes or no on the permit, please think of the lives this plant will affect. A few hundred feet away, 10 to 15 children playing on a daily basis. A few hundred feet away, adults with disabilities will be outside on a daily basis. A few hundred feet away, an elderly population will be going in and out of their church. These are all vulnerable populations that will be greatly affected by the toxic particulates spewed by the plant every single day." And that is the last registration or public comment that I have received.
On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank all the speakers coming forward, voicing your concerns about this project. Before I turn it over to, I'm going to ask Matt King to.
Chairman Hilton, if you don't mind, I do want to let the board know that the district has received over 400 comments asking for a public hearing associated with the application.
400?
And yes, and that we have agreed that we will hold that public hearing and a public comment period when we have a draft permit prepared. Mr. King, at the end of my director's report this morning, will be providing a presentation on the district's permitting process, and we invite those speakers who joined us today to either stay with us through the meeting to see that presentation, or it will be posted on our website. But we hope that that will help folks understand our process so that when we hold that public hearing and that public comment period, they're able to engage with us in a way that's meaningful for them. So I do want to be clear that the district, not the board, issues permits. Those permits are issued using federal law and the district's own regulations that this board, as our regulatory authority, authorized under KRS Chapter 77, passes to reduce air pollution in Louisville. So at this point, I'll turn it back to you, but I do want to assure folks that when we get to the part where we have a proposed permit, we will publicly notice that and notify folks that the public comment period has begun and the public hearing has been scheduled.
Well, thank you. I just want to make sure that the residents understand the process and the next step. So Mr. King can do that after your presentation. Thank you. I probably jumped the ship. I just want to make sure people knew what was going on and keep them in the loop, since evidently they were not notified about this project. So I want to make sure that we transparent that
Absolutely.
they know the next steps. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public in the Edison room or outside the public wish to make a comment regarding this project or any project? If you like to make a comment, please raise your hand by teleconference, and we will be called upon. There's a feature you can find on the participant list by pressing *3 if you are joining by phone or computer, and you will be called upon.
The only hands I see are Mr. Nance and Ms. Keith. I believe both of those were raised prior to their speaking before. If either of them have another issue, just shoot me. Both. Yeah, the hands went down, so I think we're okay.
No problem. Okay. That completes the public comment portion of the meeting. Unfinished business, there is no unfinished business for today. New business, there is no new business. Committee reports, no committees met in the last month. And we down to the staff report, Mrs. Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hilton, and good morning, everyone. So on August 1st, Chairman Hilton joined Mayor Fisher and other leaders from Metro government to present new electric-powered maintenance equipment and a storage shed to the Hope Village. The Hope Village is operated by the Hope Bus, whose mission is to combat hopelessness in Louisville's underserved neighborhoods and populations, bridging the gap between the streets and stable housing by creating transformational housing communities and empowering marginalized voices. That's a real mouthful, but I will say that after joining Mayor Fisher and Chairman Hilton to watch the presentation of the board's Air Quality Trust Fund donation to Hope Bus, those folks have a tremendous amount of passion and compassion
A lot of
for the
energy.
work that they do. Their innovation and their commitment
Commitment.
is really just energizing. So, Michelle King, the district's executive administrator and director of program planning, Matt Mudd, the district's communications specialist, and I were all able to come and see that presentation. And even despite the rain, which drove us under a shed, it was a very bright moment. Really, Reverend Busey does an amazing job, and her staff are to be commended. Seeing all their energy, we are confident that the board's electric-powered equipment will be well used and that the Hope Village will be well maintained. Mayor Fisher recognized that the equipment was made available through the Air Quality Trust Fund, which is dispersed exclusively by this board. The fund is used for conducting and funding projects that improve research for local air quality. The use of electric-powered equipment improves local air quality and reduces emissions that contribute to climate change. And the board has recently funded other projects that help Louisville lead the way on green energy. Last October, the fund was also used to help install an electric vehicle charging station at Jefferson Memorial Forest Tom Wallace Park, to support the installation of an EV charging station at Louisville Grove's Healthy House in 2016, and to add solar panels at the district's Cannon Lane monitoring station in 2010. Your leadership in supporting that green energy is well placed, and on the district's behalf, we appreciate you all taking that lead. As recommended by the Outreach and Education Committee of the Multi-Pollutant Stakeholder Group, you can learn more about the board's Air Quality Trust Fund and find a convenient link to submit a project for consideration on a new Air Quality Trust Fund page on the district's website. And my thanks to Michelle King and Matt Mudd for seeing that through. As I mentioned earlier this morning, it's been quite busy here at the district. In establishing cooperative federalism, where EPA sets a standard and state and local air programs develop plans to meet that standard, Congress added a really unique and kind of quaint provision to the Clean Air Act. It requires EPA to visit its state and local partners in person once a year. Last 2 years, we did that virtually, of course. And of course, we have monthly meetings with EPA on our state implementation plan with the Kentucky Division for Air Quality. We have quarterly regional meetings with our regional partners in EPA Region 4, and we work nearly day to day on special projects and other matters with our EPA colleagues. But on August 4th, Caroline Freeman, EPA Region 4 Air and Radiation Division Director, Anthony Toney, Deputy Director, Lenora Benjamin, Air Planning and Implementation Chief, and Todd Rink, Air Analysis and Support Chief, joined the members of the district's management team, along with Michael Kennedy, the Kentucky Division for Air Quality Director, and Rick Shawika, the Assistant Director at the Kentucky Division for Air Quality, for our first in-person meeting since August of 2019. Others joined us virtually, but it was especially nice to be able to sit down together, even socially distanced, and to have a really robust conversation about our work and the direction that work will take. Any questions about that?
No.
All right. Our request for redesignation. We are moving through this process and we're getting very close. Oh, we've talked several times over the summer about the progress that we're making on our request for redesignation. You may remember at the last board meeting, we were still within a public comment period. It ended on June the 29th. We received several comments in support of that request for redesignation and a few comments from US EPA in places where we needed to dot some I's and cross some T's. We've taken that action. We've now submitted what we believe is our final version to the Kentucky Division for Air Quality, who is preparing the submittal for Bullitt and Oldham counties, which are part of our metropolitan statistical area and our designated non-attainment area. They are also preparing a separate submittal for Northern Kentucky. And we expect in the very near future that all of those requests for redesignation will be sent to US EPA Region 4 for their final approval. We'll let you know when that package has been sent to EPA, and then we can expect it will take several months for it to work through the federal approval process. Currently, I don't have any wood to knock on, so if someone's close enough to something that's real wood, please knock. We are currently still meeting the 70 Park Pavilion National Ambient Air Quality Standard for the 2015 ozone standard. This summer has been quite strange, I think, as we all have observed. We had triple-digit weather in June when it was dry, and right now we are probably 20 degrees below, 15 degrees below normal at night, and our daytime temperatures are more September-like than late August. I have my fingers crossed that we continue to have at least cool weather, and if not, muggy weather to the end of this ozone season, and that we will be in good shape for EPA to complete that redesignation process.
So the package is plural, or is it a single package that gets submitted, and can they rule separately on the different areas, Oldham County, Northern Kentucky, and
They will
Metro?
separate out the metropolitan statistical areas. So the Northern Kentucky will stand on its own based on the analysis of the air quality there. Our packages are somewhat linked between Bullitt and Oldham counties. So my guess is, and Byron, you know, we haven't really talked with EPA about that, they may promote those both at the same time as linked, or they may not. We'll have to wait and see. So Indiana, Clark and Floyd counties are also part of our metropolitan statistical area. They have completed the redesignation process, and they have been redesignated by US EPA Region 5 as attaining that 2015 standard. So hopefully we will be in that good company here shortly.
Was there any opposition in the public comment period?
No,
No.
we had very strong support from the Kentucky Chamber, Greater Louisville, Inc., and also some really nice letter of support from some of our representatives in the General Assembly.
Now, Indiana, are they in Region 5 and we're in Region 4?
Yes.
Or would that carry some weight if they got approved, redesignated?
It does, and Ohio, which is in Region 3, has also been, the Cincinnati portion of the Northern Kentucky Cincinnati Metropolitan Statistical Area has also been redesignated by Region 3. I will say on behalf of our SIP colleagues here in the room, Michelle and Byron, that the regions are quite different. And for us, you know, we have a lot of stakeholders in these processes. Not only do we have our community, we have our board, we have the regulated sources, we have our colleagues at Kentucky Division for Air Quality, we have Region 4. And then when you add in IDEM and then also the Ohio EPA and their regions, there's a lot of opinions to work through. It's been interesting, and we've developed some really strong relationships with our colleagues at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Their longtime head of their air program was there for 45 years. He retired in 2021. And of course, we have new leadership to have new relationships with. That relationship is going quite well. So I appreciate kind of working through the process. I will say that in terms of regions, that Region 4 is very belts and suspenders. They don't leave any stone unturned. So leave it at that. All right, the really good news part of today's meeting. You may remember that last month we talked about the Supreme Court's decision in West Virginia, the EPA, that reversed and remanded an earlier decision of the D.C. Circuit Court, finding that EPA lacked authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. Kind of a bummer. We also talked about what might happen next. That EPA may propose a new regulation to address greenhouse gas emissions from existing generating units, but EPA's authority will continue to be challenged, or that Congress, just as it did recently with the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act that requires reductions of HFC, hydrofluorocarbons, a potent greenhouse gas, that they may choose to act. Well, earlier this week, the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law. Congress actually acted. The act, which includes $450 billion in spending, will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from power plants and other industrial sources, provide funding to state and local governments to reduce greenhouse gases, including the purchase of low-emission or zero-emission equipment, and help meet federal emission standards through improved energy efficiency, electrification, carbon capture, clean energy, and it includes substantial funding for that and tax credits for both the supply and manufacturing sectors. It also provides tax credits and funding for projects in disadvantaged communities to address disproportionate environmental and public health harms caused by pollution and climate change, and funding to EPA, state and local air pollution control agencies for improved monitoring, permitting, and compliance systems, and our day-to-day operations under Sections 103 and 105 of the Clean Air Act. These are things that should be considered carrots. But the Act also requires the oil and gas industry to pay a fee on excess emission releases, and that can be considered a stick. On balance, way more carrots than sticks. I have not had a chance to read it in its entirety, but interestingly enough, the Act also provides $5 billion in new funding under a new section of that Act for state, local, and municipal governments and air pollution control agencies to develop and implement greenhouse gas reduction plans. That's just new work, friends. I don't know what that will look like, but I look forward to seeing it roll out. Specifically, $250 million of that total will be provided to state and local air pollution control agencies over 5 years through planning grants. $25 million would be provided to support and implement clean air agency programs, and $5 million will help states adopt greenhouse gas and zero emission standards for vehicles under Section 177 of the Clean Air Act. Just in case it's still out there, we have currently acquired a brand new all-electric Chevy Bolt, which now brings our electric and electric hybrid fleet here at the district up to 4. As with any new legislation, the devil is in the details, and the National Association of Clean Air Agencies, or NACA, the National Nonpartisan Nonprofit Association of Air Pollution Control Agencies in 40 states, including 117 air pollution local agencies, the District of Columbia and 4 territories, has provided a guide to help us look through that large piece of legislation and see where these benefits might come to our program. The district is one of those 117 local air agencies in NACA. The mission of NACA is to advance the equitable protection of clean air and public health for all and to improve the capability and effectiveness of state and local agencies. NACA has been instrumental in working with Congress in this particular piece of legislation to represent our concerns, its membership's concerns, and has in fact provided a 16-page guide to the Act provisions that will reduce greenhouse gases, help us improve air quality, and support our work. There's a lot in here for the community as well. It also is incentivizing to help companies make the transition to cleaner energy. So, we're still reviewing the Act. We will update the board and the community when funding, grant opportunities, or other steps are taken by EPA to implement the Act. Are there any questions?
No.
So they haven't determined how funds flow, like through the state to the locals or anything?
Not yet. Not yet, but boy, when they have that detailed out, we'll let folks know. All right. You may have caught some recent media coverage of some of the district's work. A proposed construction permit for Clarion's West plant near the district's offices here at the Edison Center, litigation at Swift, and an application for a concrete batch plant on Aiken Road in East Louisville. So let me touch on those actions here briefly. On July 14th, the district proposed a construction permit for Clarion that authorizes the installation of some new equipment, modification of some existing equipment, and provides for alternative emission points for certain restricted operating scenarios. The public comment period was scheduled to end on August 15th. On August 5th, in response to several requests from the public, the district extended the public comment period to September 14th and scheduled a public hearing for 6 p.m. on September 8th on this permit. Are there any questions on that? On Monday of this week, the Courier-Journal ran an article about a class action lawsuit that has been filed against Swift by a group of individuals in the neighborhood. The article also noted that the Jefferson County Attorney's Office filed a petition for an administrative hearing on behalf of the district with the Office of the Kentucky Attorney General regarding several outstanding notices of violation for Swift Pork Company. As I've previously shared, in accordance with APCD Regulation 1.19, at the end of that administrative hearing, the board will consider the report, recommended order, and exceptions and adopt a final order resolving the matter. In light of this, Regulation 1.19 prohibits the board from having any communication concerning the merits of a proceeding between a party, the proceeding, a person interested in the proceeding, or a representative of a party or interested person and a board member. Questions regarding case status, procedural requirements will be addressed to Mr. Gary, our Secretary Treasurer. This means that if you're asked a question about the litigation by the media or the public or others, please refer them to Mr. Gary. Once adopted by the board, the final order may be appealed. Are there any questions about that?
Does that include the class action suit?
The district is not a party to the class action. However, we still caution that because we have a matter proceeding, that the board refrain from talking about issues that we're also litigating.
Okay.
I just want to note, we have lost the AV laptop in here. We should still be mostly on camera and audible, but we are unable to see the other board members attending remotely at the moment. I may need just a moment before getting to the presentation. But you can continue with any audio.
Is that
Regarding,
okay?
We have one member of the audience that's not staff, so I would recommend that we wait.
Thank you. Chairman Hill, we're going to take just a
okay,
break here while we get this set back up in order to comply with the Attorney General's provisions for having a virtual meeting.
okay.
Well, if anything that the last year has taught us is that technology can be an unsteady, unreliable partner.
No more.
Andy, can you hear us?
Andy or Sherry, are you able to hear the Edison room again? Ms. Shobe-White, it looks like you might be trying to speak to us. You're muted if you are and you can hear us. I'm not sure if anybody can hear us right now, though. Oh, Kevin says we can hear us, so I think we are.
Byron, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. We're good to go then.
Okay, good, thank you.
I'll get Ms. Neal back on the screen as soon as able.
Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We are back. Mrs. Hampton, you can continue.
Thank you, Chairman Hilton, and our apologies for the technical hiccups, but as we've all learned, they're sort of unavoidable these days. My thanks to Byron, Steve, and Matt for stepping in to get us back up and running. Okay, so on July 14th, the district received an application to construct a concrete batch plant on Aiken Road.
I think we're good.
As I mentioned earlier, we've received over 400 comments and have asked for a public hearing associated with that application. We have informed folks that we will open a public comment period and schedule a public hearing once we've prepared a draft permit for review. Again, the district issues permits. The board sets our rules. The district's permits are issued under those rules and federal law. That's how we prepare that permit here at APCD. So, just want to reiterate, the board is our regulatory authority. You're authorized under KRS Chapter 77 to basically establish that playbook that we use when we develop those permits. We take comment on a proposed permit, not on an application. Mr. King is going to walk us through our process this morning and hopefully help people understand where we're at and when to expect the next thing to happen so that they can be assured again that we want to make this process as transparent as we can for them. The district permits are issued, though, based on federal and local air pollution laws and regulations. That means that there are some areas of concern that aren't considered by the district in deciding to issue or deny a permit. And these include items not covered by our law or regulations, noise, traffic, lighting, hours of operation, unless those are necessary to meet a pollution limit, or whether the facility is sited in the proper location. Indoor air pollution, emission sources, and an existing source that aren't covered in the permit that's under review are also not part of that public comment when we issue a modification or a revision to an existing permit. So Matt's going to walk us through the process, but does anyone have any questions for me at this point?
No, I think really if most people remember about two and a half years ago, we had this public meeting with regarding ASRP, American Synthetic Rubber Company, and we remember that it was very heated. And I think we told the people and residents that, you know, the board does not have any authority, but we were present to run the meeting.
The board is our host for those public meetings.
We're the host, and I'm sure that meeting went wild, got out of control. So, yeah.
Our expectation is that all of our public meetings will be held in a way that everyone can be heard, and that's our hope anytime we hold a public meeting or a public hearing. So on this one, Matt, if you'd like to walk us through the permitting process, that'd be great. And Mr. King, by the way, is the district's industrial permitting manager. a licensed professional environmental engineer, and one of the district's 2 air pollution control officers.
Thank you. Today we're going to talk about the most exciting part of air pollution control work. No, it really is an important part, but it's just one part. I think that's something that takes a few years to really pick up on. There's a ton of moving parts in the Clean Air Act and in our local regs. They all kind of have to come together to have success, but permitting is a really big part of that. And I'll also say I would have had trouble bringing this up without a computer shutdown, so Byron, good job keeping us running.
I think that is visible as possible in the room.
All right, so real quick, we have a mission statement here. The Air Pollution Control District protects air quality in Louisville Metro to ensure healthy air for breathing, economic security, and prosperity for all Louisvillians. That is a heck of a mission. We strive for that, but it's one that is pretty tough to meet. So a lot of effort goes into really embracing that mission, and you'll note it does talk about prosperity and economic security. So reducing pollution is a tough job in and of itself, but the Clean Air Act and our work really tries to balance those economic interests, the production of goods and services that might create pollution, but then protecting that air quality. It's not just reducing pollution, it's protecting air quality and keeping that balance between those things. Next slide, please. All right, and as Rachel mentioned, a lot of laws and regulations go into our work. It's pretty complicated stuff. You know, it's both federal and local regulations and laws, but it really is what drives the permitting process. Those regulations and laws, you know, there's a lot of room for input in the development of those things, but when we're writing a permit, we're not writing those laws and regulations. We're working with those existing laws and regulations. Next slide, please. All right, so permits from an air agency are a little different than what a lot of people think of permits. It is a compilation of the numerous air pollution regulations. It also explains how those facilities will show that they're complying with those regulations. So it's not just setting limits and standards, it's building a whole structure to verify that those limits and standards are met. It's a lot more like a contract than like a typical building permit. Some of them are well over 100 pages. They're pretty complex, but there are a lot of rules and regulations to put in there. Next slide, please. All right, so who needs a permit? In Louisville, we permit more people than a lot of your state agencies might. A lot of that is due to we're a fairly large industrial city and also one that's had a history of some air pollution issues. So as time has gone on, we've dealt with non-attainment issues, and that requires us to permit at a higher level. We do have some exempt sources. They're typically mom and pop type shops that do emit air pollution. They are not exempt from regulation, but they are exempt from the obligation to get a permit, but still have to meet all rules and regulations. We also have registered sources. It's kind of like a permit light, but they do apply and receive a document from us. It's just considered a registration. And then your more traditional terms, the minor source are those small facilities that still get a full-blown air permit. I'm going to skip that middle one for a second. We have Title V. That's Title V of the Clean Air Act. Those are our major sources. Those are the large emitters. And then FEDU, one of my favorite acronyms, Federally Enforceable District Origin Operating Permit. It's when a facility, if run at full load all day and all night, the entire year, would have major source emissions, but does not plan to operate that way, whether through limited production or the use of control devices, will have minor source emissions. So we give them a special permit and put them in that middle category. Next slide, please. All right, so the permitting process is fairly complex. There are some differences depending on if you're getting a construction permit or an operating permit, if you're a Title V major source, or if you're one of those true minor sources. But here are the basic steps, and we have a pretty nice brochure that we can provide to folks. There's a link to it here on this presentation, which will be on our website shortly. The main steps are, once we have reviewed an application, if that application is not complete, if we can't issue a permit, it doesn't really make it to this step. But typically industry knows what they're required to do, and if they're part of their developing their projects, they've reviewed the rules and they give us a complete application. We then produce a draft permit. Again, this isn't for all permits, but for a lot of our permits, they then go out for a public notice period. That's a 30-day comment. Folks can submit through email or in paper mail comments on the permit. And then you'll see, I know it's really tough to read, but there's an optional public hearing. Our regulations require public hearings for regulation, for enforcement actions, but for permits, it says we may hold a public hearing if either the board or the district determines there's significant public interest. And something I've seen the agency do for many years is not really set a high bar for that. If we get a couple people asking for a hearing, we typically have the hearing. It doesn't always make people happy, but at least have that opportunity to participate. Then there's opportunities for us to consider those comments. Typically, a comment would not lead to the denial of a permit, but to changing the permit, correcting a missing regulation in that permit, maybe insufficient monitoring and record keeping to demonstrate that. For certain major source permits, we then take them to EPA for a separate comment period where they can review and address any issues in those permits. What we've tried to do over the years, it used to be things we would publish in the Courier Journal. We now put them on our website. If you sign up for a mailing list, you can get that information. It is a complex process, but it's one we try to explain to folks and make sure they at least know where they can be involved. Next slide, please. So a permit, we also provide a statement of basis, a separate document with our permits. Some folks will call those a summary. They're still pretty technical and can be lengthy, but it tries to lay out the basis for the requirements, cover any regulations that don't apply but may appear to apply, to explain why they don't technically apply to that source. You'll note the standards section is really important. It sets those limits, but also the monitoring, record keeping, reporting. How do we verify that they're in compliance with that permit? And then testing. That's done by third parties typically with prescribed scientific methods to kind of ground truth a lot of those assumptions that go into these applications, especially a construction permit application. The facility's not there, so you don't have that real world information, but we often follow up with required testing to ground truth those assumptions. Next slide, please. All right, so try to think of a regulation that's kind of generally applicable and something that's fairly easy to understand. So when we're writing a permit, we're again starting with that application, looking at the regulations that might apply, seeing that the facility has proposed processes that do comply with those rules. So kind of a generic regulation we have is for anyone coating metal parts. And apologize for the small print, but it's to point out there that there's 4 separate coating standards. So VOCs, which are important to our ozone attainment, are limited in painting operations to how much VOC per gallon of coating can be used. There's 4 different categories. We determine what coatings they are using, and then we verify that it meets those VOC requirements, or they could put add-on controls. If a company wants to use a higher VOC coating and does not propose to add on controls, we would not issue that permit. Fortunately, most of our painters, most of our companies getting into that line of work have reviewed these types of things. The manufacturers of coatings are aware of these, and it's pretty easy to find coatings that meet the regulations and accomplish the stated objectives. You'll note things up there like extreme performance coating. So in reviewing a permit, this regulation has a definition for what an extreme performance coating is. A company can't just claim that to get a higher standard. It has to actually meet those conditions. So there's some review of that, but there's not a whole lot of deciding how much VOC should be in a gallon of coating. That was done when this regulation was passed. The permit writer is simply verifying which category, clearly putting that in the permit, and then requiring records to prove that. And I think you'll hear about this more next month, but then an inspector will go out periodically and verify what they're painting with, making sure their inventory meets these regulations. And, that permit kind of steps through that process of all the records you would keep, how you would prove that compliance. I think something key about our permits, especially when it comes to that public comment period, there's a lot of important elements to comment on a permit, but we're really, as permit writers, looking at these regulations, these specific conditions. And I think, unlike the regulatory process, we're not thinking about what could happen, what might be improvements to this regulatory structure. We're applying those regs as they exist. Next slide, please. All right, so yeah, public participation. It's, I think, getting easier to be a part of this, but it's still a pretty complex process. So there's a lot of resources out there. I think the best one is to sign up for our newsletter or our mail outs. We don't bombard people. You'll get a few, but you won't get flooded. You'll see when regs are being proposed, when meetings are coming up, and certainly when permits go out for public comment. We also have a proposed actions page, so you can go there and see what's in play currently. Things get, some period of time when they're out there as proposed, where comments can be made in preparation maybe for a hearing. There's information there, so I would check that often if you're interested in these topics. Certainly attending a board meeting, you'll hear about our work and have a chance to make comments there. An open records request. I think that that can seem a little daunting to an average resident, but it's a simple process. We have a good records coordinator who can fill those requests quickly. You can do that online, get it emailed to you, and you don't need to wait for something to be in that proposed state. You can ask for existing permits, reports that companies submit in. All types of our permitting records can be acquired that way. Again, it can be an insider's game. We speak our own language, so we have a lot of information out there too on our Clearing the Air workshop and other training to kind of help folks learn the acronyms we use and understand the concepts we're talking about. Next slide, please. Yeah, so again, we accept any comments. Folks are free to come in and tell us what they think about anything, but we are most affected by actionable comments. And so certainly if it's an opportunity to voice your concern, it may not change the permit, but it may still be beneficial to voice that concern. But as far as how those comments will affect a permit, you want to make sure you're timely, you're on a topic that's actually up for comment at the current time. I think Director Hamilton mentioned if we're working on one plant and you're concerned about a neighboring facility, those comments won't apply to that permit action. Make sure they're within the authority of the agency. We don't do zoning, we don't deal with noise and light pollution, things like that, but we do have plenty of authority on those air pollutants. So that's where you want to focus your comments. Make sure you're at the right step in the process. Like I said, we'll be almost continuously conducting these open comment periods, but it really needs to be within that window for it to be considered. And you want to make that an actionable request. So we cite a certain regulation, you go into that regulation, you realize it in fact has a different standard than what we've applied. That's something that could really be easily addressed through a comment period. Those more general comments about air quality are kind of tough to work into a permit. So we hear those. We certainly pass those on to the board when we see community concern, but they may not affect that permit as much as folks would like to.
In terms of passing that information on to the board, one of the steps that Matt showed requires us, when we have comments, to prepare a response to comment document. That's required at the time the district makes a decision on a permit. And in that document, you'll find the comment we received, it will be in there verbatim, and our response to that comment. So we will share those with the board. We make those available on our recent actions page when we move a permit or other regulation or other action by the board or the district. Once that decision has been made, it goes to another web page, recent actions, and that response to comment document will be sent to the commenters. It'll be shared publicly, and we'll share that with the board.
Okay.
Next slide, but I think that's the last one, yes. I'll be happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Matt, can you talk a little bit about the difference in construction and operating permits,
Sure.
especially related to new facilities?
Yep. So construction is somewhat of a misnomer. We don't tell them, what type of steel beams to use or concrete to pour. A lot of folks refer to them as pre-construction permits. And the concept is that we fully vet that application for your larger projects. They'll go through some case-by-case determinations. And if you don't make those before they start building, the companies will often allege difficulty in now implementing that in a half-built facility. So we need to do those permits before they're building, when there is still time to get into those designs and add control devices and maybe testing ports and things that will aid in that compliance. There is an opportunity with large projects to apply best available control technology, to do that air dispersion modeling, some of those things that don't typically happen for smaller sources. So that major new source review is a really critical step with bigger sources. We don't see a lot of that kind of construction, but it does happen. The operating permit is a compilation of all of those things. With the 1990 Clean Air Amendments, they realized they've been putting out tons of permits, but they may have been issued years apart or scattered around a file room. And EPA said, we want to do, especially for major sources, one comprehensive operating permit that incorporates all of those things. That has trickled into the smaller sources now. All of our sources have one operating, and then they can get individual constructions as the processes go along. And that's an opportunity to really double check that there's all those requirements are in that document, but the monitoring, the testing is adequate, build in emission calculation estimates so that those aren't changing frequently. We've kind of locked into how we look at that facility, document all of that. Those operating permits, especially Title V, have been really the front runner in public notice and public involvement. Again, not on the, do we want this facility or not in our neighborhood, but really looking at those conditions, looking at what regulations apply, and making sure we've adequately covered all those things.
And are they, how do I phrase this? Do they happen separate in time, the construction? And so is there two processes that involve public comment and hearing?
At APCD, they happen separately. Okay. Some agencies just have one permit and add new construction to that. Construction, obviously, a brand new facility happens first, and then any significant changes of that facility go through the construction permitting process. For all Title Vs, those are noticed. Construction permits for all Title V operating permits, those are noticed. In the FEDUP category, the FEDUP operating is public noticed. That initial limit set in construction permit. So a company may be a minor source. They're going to expand into a potentially major source and opt for that middle category FEDUP. That first permit would be public noticed as well. I think you're seeing some growing pushes to public notice more permits, especially with the use of the internet. It used to be you put it in the newspaper, very few people read the classifieds. It's a little easier to get the message out. And it doesn't always bring people satisfaction, but they at least are aware of it, get a chance to speak their opinion on it. And we have seen where comments change permits, where individuals bring up things that we maybe missed or we thought about a little differently. Sometimes even if the regs don't call for something, these comments go to the company as well. Our regulations give them a chance to respond if they choose to. And sometimes companies will say, hey, we don't think your reg supports this, but these people really want this. We can handle this. It doesn't happen often, but there's multiple purposes to this commenting.
Yeah, Matt raises a really good point. When we receive those comments in our rules, they're provided to the company for their review, and they are able to provide a written response that we'll add as an appendix to that response to comment document. So he's right, it can be very valuable. Part of what our unmerged program here is, it's not a symptom per se. With the Clean Air Act, we do a lot of work kind of through the rearview mirror. So Clean Air Act was passed in 1970. State and local programs began to write permits for sources We have some for sources here in Louisville, quite large sources, where their permit is a page from the 1970s. And by 1990, there was that kind of understanding that there needs to be more in the permit to assure compliance. And so those provisions for adding in the operating permit program, robust record-keeping, reporting, and monitoring provisions, it's really kind of an offshoot of that early phase of permitting. The district's construction permits include what our staff believe will be the appropriate record-keeping, reporting, and monitoring when they begin operation. So it's kind of a bridge of construct it, begin operating it, and then it'll be rolled into an operating permit that's renewed on a 5-year basis. If modified, again, it would come open for public comment. But the Inspector General at US EPA has issued a report that nationally, there's a lot of programs out there that aren't hitting the basic mark for public noticing. We will see more about EPA's expectations on public noticing of permits and at what level. Matt mentioned that we permit a lot more sources than our state counterparts. I was on a call with our counterparts in an organization called Metro 4 yesterday with other local programs, and we were all sharing how much lower our permitting process covers sources than our state counterparts. That can be quite a gap in terms of the size of a source that can be exempt at the state level here in Kentucky versus what ABCD regulates and issues a permit for.
I just have one quick question, Mr. King. My understanding that SI Ready Mix submitted an application for a minor permit, right?
I believe the application for a VDOOP, that middle category.
Okay. My question is, when they submit the application, do they estimate, like in this particular project, they're probably talking about particulate matter, real small size. Do they specify filtration and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'll kind of speak more generally. We will pretty shortly have that draft permit out for public notice.
But that will address.
But in general, yes, they come in and look at the capacity of a plant. So
right.
It's designed to make X amount of product.
Right.
That means we're putting this much raw material in, and we'll be doing these activities. And then they can estimate what the emissions would look like from that.
Gotcha.
And they'll start with uncontrolled, and then they'll show us numbers for the controls they plan to put in. And again, that's not meant to be completely unrealistic, but it is a facility analyzed as if it were running all day, every day, which is really hard to achieve, but it's not meant to be ridiculous, but to get that feel of if this thing really achieves a high level of operation, what would it emit? And then we know what we're dealing with. Right. And if they want to take limits or voluntarily request those lower categories, we can build conditions.
This is different from having a existing facility. This is completely new.
Yes.
So okay, gotcha.
Yep. All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Are there any questions from Mr. King regarding thank you for the presentation. That was very enlightening.
Thank you.
Sort of refreshed my memory a little bit about the process, how it works. So I just want to make sure I understand what the process is. Thank you very much. No questions. I guess we can continue on with our agenda. Our quality data, that was, these report was distributed electronically. Are there any questions by board members regarding our quality data report?
Just a casual comment, the weather is hot. What days like today, is that good or bad foreshadowing?
So,
or who knows?
well, it can be a who knows. We make ozone at this time of the year, sun's angle, wind. If we get a stagnant air mass, we could make ozone on a day like today. Billy is on the call, and Andy, if you'd elevate Billy, he might be able to share some more information. But typically in August, you know, it gets really, really hot, but it also gets very, very muggy. That humidity helps scrub ozone formation. If we have, again, a stagnant air mass, even with high humidity, we can see ozone formation. we still have to get all the way to November 1st. So it's been a weird year. I just want to keep my fingers crossed. I did want to mention, and I failed to do so, that we have heard from EPA that they still anticipate issuing a proposed particulate matter standard revision later this summer.
Running out of time.
It's not gone to the Office of Management and Budget yet at the federal level. That's usually a 60 to 90-day process. So their definition of summer may be a little longer than mine, but it's still coming.
Okay. Moving on, our toxic report, any questions regarding our toxic report?
There was no air toxic report this month, Chairman Hilton. Just a note for the record.
Oh, you know, I'm looking at the enforcement status report. In status enforcement, sort of a short report, enforcement status summary. Any questions on that report? No report for the air toxic, okay. What about the excess emission report? That's a short report also. Any questions, comments on that? The complaint and investigation status report. I don't think I made any notes on that one. It looks good. So, look like our reports, or except for our toxic report, looks good. I will now adjourn the regular meeting of the board and thank everyone for your attendance. The next board meeting is Wednesday, September the 21st. Thank you very much.